Oh, we're live. Okay, great. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this very special live stream that I am apparently ill-prepared for, wherein we are going to watch together the leaders' debate here in Alberta. Our premier, the incumbent premier, Danielle Smith of the United Conservative Party, is vying for re-election, but so is the socialist former premier, still the leader of the NDP party, Rachel Notley. Depending on where you look, the polls are neck and neck. I'm not so sure. I think it is not as close as those pollsters in the mainstream media would love it to be, although maybe I'm just an eternal optimist here and have some faith in my fellow Albertans. But joining me tonight is my friend Adam Sos. He's a Calgary-based journalist for us here at Rebel News. Adam, how's it going?
It's going wonderful. Looking forward to this. Should be an interesting conversation. Curious to see how it's going to unfold, whether the NDP's personal attacks will continue, if it's going to get heated and turn into this, as I've dubbed it, American-style election, and how Danielle Smith will respond to that, if the UCP will continue to disregard that and focus on jobs, economy, safety, those sort of core voting policy issues. So it should be interesting. It could be very dull, or it could be extremely exciting. Either way, we're going to be here reacting for all of it. So
I'm going to try to hide my expressions. I know some people, when we cover these debates, they watch my expressions because usually my microphone's off and my face sort of gives me away. I wanted to talk to you about the polls, Adam, because depending on where you are getting your information, the polls, some of them have Notley and Smith neck and neck. I should let our viewers know the Liberal Party basically doesn't exist in Alberta, so the progressive vote coalesces around the NDP. But I'm skeptical. I think they're oversampling Edmonton, and Edmonton's a write-off. You can really only win those ridings once. So if if the NDP vote continues to rise in Edmonton, literally who cares? What do you think?
yeah, I think there is probably some of that. And I mean, demographic bases can change. It depends on who they're calling. Very often it is older folks who are at home, who are willing to answer these calls and do that. Those might favor the UCP. In these times, these polls could have been done when the workers were striking. They were at home answering phone calls, and some of those union people, well, maybe they voted, or at least professed in the polls that they would be voting that way. We know that polling is an imperfect science. There's also the factor that, well, lately people vote far more emotionally than they used to. So the issue of the day can very much sway things. We've seen polls that suggested it was impossible for Donald Trump to become president. The day of the election, I remember one of the polls had a 97% chance that it's Hillary Clinton, at which point I put a $1 bet at 67 to 1 odds and made $67. But this tendency to have votes not necessarily turn out how polls are is an emerging trend. But this time around, lots of the credible polls either show it's very, very close, or the UCP is significantly ahead. So even if we set aside all biases and look at the sort of average means, you're leaning towards the UCP either coming very close or winning by a significant margin. I think one was something like 51 seats to the UCP, which would be a significant majority. With the two parties, you effectively just have a majority system. You're not likely to have a number of other candidates. One thing that's interesting, though, and we can get into this in a little bit, though, with one candidate still very probably going to win her election, her constituency anyways, now being told by the party, based on some comments, which we can get into, that she won't be a UCP MLA. It'd be very interesting if she won, and this was indeed very close, and you had the one person with perhaps some more conservative views controlling that balance, if it is indeed as close. Because imagine if, unlike the federal situation where you have Jagmeet Singh as the deal breaker, so everything trends extremely left, if you had someone arguably more conservative, certainly more socially conservative, holding that power balance, that would be extremely interesting. Not likely to happen, but it is something to consider.
Yeah, let's talk about the news of the day. It broke sort of mid-morning. I was out and about covering a story which should be out tomorrow, so I didn't get to pay as close attention to it, but I did read the report when I got back to my little studio. and that is the ethics complaint lodged by the NDP against Premier Danielle Smith. There was an investigation which found that she very, very slightly bent some ethics rules, but also found that the CBC completely lied about her. So the Alberta Ethics Commissioner finds no evidence of Danielle Smith pressuring Crown prosecutors on COVID files. This is directly from, let's quote directly from it. In the Commissioner's opinion, I had a discussion with Minister Shandro that was inappropriate regarding this subject, says Premier Danielle Smith. As to Mr. Pelosi, the court has rendered a verdict in his case and the matter is now closed. So what happened here was Danielle Smith, to become the leader of the party, campaigned on basically providing amnesty to lock down COVID violators, COVID scofflaws. If we want to just pause right here because I want to come back to this. So she campaigned on that. People elected her and chose her to lead the party because she said, I'm going to look into this.
And I'm the one, and I can testify to that because I'm the one who asked her the two first times, at which point she said, I'm going to look into it. That's precisely what she said verbatim to me. Yeah.
Right. Which is why, by the way, people got rid of Jason Kenney, the former leader of the UCP, is because he was locking everybody up.
Today, by the way, it's the anniversary.
It's the anniversary of his announcement of his resignation?
Yeah.
So she campaigns to do the opposite of him, say, not only am I not going to lock people up, but I'm going to see how I can undo some of the damage that's been done here. So she contacts her justice minister, because that's who you would get legal advice from if you're the premier, and says, hey, can we do this? He says, I don't think we can. She says, okay, I'm dropping it then. There was no undue pressure, really. She just asked and he said no. And then that was the end, literally at the end of it. She didn't contact the Crown prosecutors about any of this. She just talked to her justice minister, and that's the end of it. Now, CBC is saying, basically, CBC said that she did pressure the Crown prosecutors. That there's no evidence of that, which means that based on the commissioner's report, CBC lied and continues to lie about the premier.
Yeah, it's listen, if you look at this report objectively versus what the news cycle is stating, they're taking the one line that is basically like, yeah, technically she's probably the only person in the province who could be seen as exerting a pressure of influence on Tyler Shandro. So that was maybe a little bit out of line, technically a conflict of interest. So I'm suggesting that we do some training to ensure this doesn't happen again, but there's going to be no further penalties. That could change in the future, but it's not a big deal. The report basically lays down how everything else, and by the way, that one little phone call she never denied. She said she sought that, was informed that it would be sort of not a due judicial process, and backed away from it. That was not what people were outraged about. They were outraged about the sentiment that she was weekly harassing Crown prosecutors to drop these charges. It's now, per the evidence of an extensive investigation, clear that that is not the case. And the CBC continues to cite this source that they won't identify and they have no evidence for. The Premier, Danielle Smith, has suggested that she will likely follow up, or at least is discussing potentially following up legal action based on these comments. And I certainly hope they do, because the term election interference, if someone is mischaracterizing a candidate extensively, and when an official finding, this official report is released, it debunks that narrative, and you continue to push that, that clearly indicates that there's an agenda and you're attempting to either defame or slander that candidate. That seems to be what's happening here. And that's what these reports, these headlines all seem to stipulate. So was this an absolute absolution of Danielle Smith? It's like, no, she might have misstepped one place here, but it doesn't seem to be a big deal. That's what this report says.
Well, and how could, okay, so the allegation from CBC is that she was putting undue pressure on Crown prosecutors to let Pastor Art Pawlowski off the hook. He was convicted. He was convicted. So she absolutely didn't get involved. And Pastor Art was convicted of being involved at the Coutts border blockade. Now, there's some intent to appeal that down the road. But if she intervened on his behalf, Show me the evidence where he benefited from any of that. They can't, I think Ezra noted they went through like 1 million plus emails.
Yeah, and talk to 75 witnesses or something.
And
Like,
talked to 75 witnesses and found no real evidence that she contacted Crown prosecutors about any of this.
yeah.
As I said to Ezra when we were sort of discussing this in the morning, this is exactly akin to Justin Trudeau seeking advice from his justice minister when he legalized marijuana and said, okay, well, there are all these people still before the courts with marijuana charges. What do we do about it? Can we do anything about it? Not even saying like, what do we do about it? But is there something that we might do here, or do we wait until later? That's all that this discussion was. That's exactly what it would have been and has been on the progressive side. By the way, I'm reliably informed that the left around this country, they don't really care about ethics violations because they keep electing Justin Trudeau for really egregious ones. So all of a sudden they care when a conservative asks a question.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I know what they're talking about doing to ensure this doesn't happen again, and the premier alluded to this, was implementing some sort of metric. Maybe there's the person making a ruling on this was like, you know what, if this would have been done in a session with a number of people instead of a phone call, that would have been a better procedure to ensure, sure, whatever, make things better, admit your faults, kind of move on. But the core sort of crises here that was reported and generated all these scandals, well, there's really no substance to it. And the fact that these groups haven't apologized, whether it be the CBC or the NDP, and that they continue to push these narratives, it's going to be interesting to see if they do so during the debates tonight. It's going to be the center of the story. To use the term a liar is pretty accurate at this point. I don't think that it is inaccurate. Not to say that it's her character altogether, but that she has lied. Rachel Notley, she says she's going to take questions from media. When they show up, she said she's not going to take questions. She pushes these narratives and these lies. We'll talk about some of the other stories of the day here, certainly where whether it be media outlets or Rachel Notley or her ministers are ministers, well, rather some of her top candidates. Twist stories in order to make someone look as bad as humanly possible. And then when the facts come clean, no one in the media calls them out except for us. No one holds them accountable. So to end on this, I do hope that Premier Danielle Smith, I get we're a week and change out from an election. She's not going to do it now. I hope that there is legal action on this because the media can't get away with this and political parties can't get away with overtly lying. What Justin Trudeau did, and there's some comparisons, is infinitely worse. And these conversations happen all the time. Good. Let's get it in the light. Let's have it be a little bit more transparent. I want to get into the next sort of story of the day, and it's something that is no doubt going to come up during the debate tonight. It goes back to the sort of lake of fire incident with the Wild Rose. Most of the NDP's campaign, they cannot campaign on the 2015 term because it was atrocious. They can't point to any of those facts. Most of their policies or their big announcements to do buildings, whatever it may be, despite canceling the Red Deer Hospital, all that stuff, all they're doing, and I think Danielle Smith called it gamesmanship. They'll take whatever the UCP says and does the actual work on, and then they'll just add a little bit more. They're not going to be able to hire 4,000 teachers. They're currently having issues staffing the current existing positions. They're not going to build 40 schools in Calgary in 4 years. If you believe that, I don't know what to say to you. You need help. Those campaign promises are absolutely ludicrous. So they're making absurd promises, and then they're lying or besmirching or misquoting radio talk show comments and discussions from years ago. That's the extent of their campaign.
Yeah. Why don't you give us a little bit of backgrounder with the comments by Jennifer Johnston. She's the Lacombe-Pinoka UCP candidate, or she was. Now she is elected and she probably will be. It's Lacombe-Pinoka, pretty deep blue conservative riding. She is not going to sit in the UCP caucus. She, as you indicated earlier, she just even might hold the balance of power in a pretty close legislative session. I'm scrolling through this CBC article and I must be about 30 paragraphs in before I can actually find out what she really said. Go ahead.
So this, if you say anything critical, even completely fair and balanced, or point out things like the fact that much of the sex ed curriculums right across this province were at least inspired in part by convicted sex offender Benjamin Levin. If you even suggest something like that, or suggest that the progressive left, the LGBTQIA, whatever additional letters you want to set, if you suggest that maybe their approach isn't the best in any way, shape, or form, you will be demonized. It doesn't even matter if you're saying maybe this isn't the best approach. You can point to studies. It doesn't matter. You can have the most level-headed criticisms. You can be a gay person, let's say the people from Gays Against Groomers, whatever it may be, offering some criticism of this, and you'll be demonized and lumped in as a villain. Now, that being said, I do think that some of these comments are concerning, and they aren't the first comments that are listed. A lot of those criticisms, as extreme as they may be, whether it be talking about sterilization, well, it is a fact that some, not all, but some youth who undergo gender transitioning, they're basically being given some of the same drugs that are used for chemical sterilization. So that is an accurate sentiment. Hospitals in the United States have engaged in sort of legal matters on double mastectomies for minors. There are court proceedings ongoing because of that. So those comments are factual. It's interesting, if you go online and you research this, the kitty litter boxes being put in schools for people who identify as cats, that might sound outlandish, and everyone from the NDP to the fact checkers states that doesn't happen. But I have it on good authority. In fact, our very own K2 Kean Simone, in his small town in Ontario, there was a school where this happened. Very often there's backlash. The parents are outraged and they clap back. Some of them have been removed, but there are school boards that have at least issued letters on this idea of putting litter boxes inside of schools for people who identify as cats. So she first said, well, she's talking about things that are happening in the United States, and the UCP seemed to be okay with that. They seem to acknowledge that as a reality. Some of these things are happening here as well, by the way. Most of her criticisms there, I don't really have much of a problem with. Where it gets a little bit contentious is the interpretation of, there's this old sort of a little bit of poop spoils the brownies type metaphor, where you can talk about, like, oh, if the Kool-Aid has a little bit of poison in it, you can't drink it, whatever. You know, the symbolism that people use to make these points. So per her quotations, you could theoretically interpret that she's comparing people, even trans people, to feces. And that's completely unacceptable.
I guess. I guess.
But I don't think, really quickly, I don't think that's what it's saying, though, because the context is, it doesn't matter if the education system is perfect and we're getting really good results if the outcome is kids are being sterilized. It seems to be that she's using this feces in the brownies or feces in the cookie dough, I think she says.
It's clunky. It's a bit clunky. I can read it directly. So she's, at least as what CBC has transcribed for us, so take that for what you will, because we just accused them of lying about the premier. But so this is from September 1st of last year, before Johnson won the UCP nomination. Although I'm pretty sure she would have won it in Lacombe anyway, if this were widely known. She's at speaking to a group about homeschooling. And so these people who are people who are already really invested in how bad the education system is, so much so that they've pulled their kids out of it. And it's homeschooling into homeschooling pods, like these learning pods, where parents sort of work collaboratively and support each other. And she's telling them that Alberta's education system ranks among the highest in the world for achievement. And this is true. And I think it's directly because we have the most diverse education system in the country. But these accomplishments mean little when set against the issue of transgender students in schools. I don't think it's about transgender students in schools. It's about this contagion that kids get infested with when they're at school. These kids who are identifying as cats, and a teacher puts a litter box in the classroom for them, Johnson tells the audience. She says girls are saying they're not girls anymore, quote, when they're 7 years old and transitioning at 14 and getting mastectomies, double mastectomies, and getting chemically sterilized when they can't even go to a liquor store and buy a beer. Yes, exactly.
Agreed. No problem with any of that.
Hundo P. I'm there. Then she compared the situation to baking a batch of cookies laced with a drop of feces to explain whether the food has any appeal. So when
So
people are saying that she, I think it's a reach to say that she's saying this about transgender kids. She's saying this about an education system that is infesting kids with a social contagion, and all of that negates the good work
yeah,
of the education system when you are graduating kids who think they're cats.
yeah. They clearly didn't get their reading comprehension skills from a charter school or homeschooling, because they seem to interpret whether it's a radio clip or something like this, where this comment. At first, I read all of it and I was like, whatever. And then before I could see the whole quote, if I'm like, well, if someone running for office literally compared trans people to feces, they have no
You don't
business
do
running
that.
for office.
Yeah.
And the UCP is completely justified in ejecting them and saying you can run on your own because that's not what this party stands for. But I don't think that's what happened here.
No,
And
okay, so this is her direct
let's keep
quote.
going. Yeah.
She said, we can be top 3%, but that little bit of poop is what wrecks it. It's more than a teaspoon of poop in the cookie batch, right? It doesn't matter that we're in the top 3% in the world. Who cares if they got an 89% in chemistry 30? Who cares that they are entering post-secondary if they are chemically castrated? Yeah, okay. I actually agree with that sentiment.
Yeah.
Because you're graduating book smart people who are now have made irreparable damage to their body, their human being, and many of them will experience a tragic and often fatal regret.
And it does seem clear there that she's saying it doesn't matter if the system is exceptional if this is what it's doing to people. I don't read that. And I get definitely I wouldn't have used that language, and that isn't good apologetics by any metric. But I don't
No.
think you can really, unless you're looking at this with the intention to characterize her as a monster. If you're looking at this objectively, I don't think you say she's comparing people to that. She's saying we have this grade A academic system, but if it's ruining people's lives, that's the to use her terminology, poop in the cookie batter.
Yeah, I think she's basically saying in the most clunkiest way possible that the ends do not justify the means. That you have to look at human beings as they are going through the education system as the sum of the whole. And it's just not enough to graduate good book learners. These people have to be capable of taking on the world, and we have to not be damaging them along the way.
Now, I do want to
get done communications for her.
we want to make sure that we can get to the debate live as soon as it starts. I do want to touch on one other story, which is maybe all the time we'll have. I want to talk about what I think should be an absolutely critical elections issue, the safety and addictions sort of announcement that the UCP had the other day. And Rachel Notley's, and I love using the term ham-fisted attempts to pretend that her party was never about this sort of harm reduction, safe drug supply strategy, because what the UCP came out with and said was so popular. I think we actually have a clip, and they can start rolling whenever, and I'll be quiet, but I think we have a clip of some of the powerful sort of content that came out of that UCP presser. So if we can let that roll, that would be wonderful. They're just pulling it up. So this was the presser the other day that took place right before we were not allowed to ask questions at another NDP event. It was a big crowd. For the context, there's four First Nations chiefs or elders, representatives for the community, as well as a large community of people who have dealt with addictions or people whose family have dealt with addictions. You don't go to many of these pressers. Usually it's like a 5% tax cut or a discount for seniors. You don't go to these things planning to be crying, but I can assure you most of the media was crying. And it was interesting to see the public safety and emergency minister, Mike Ellis, actually, after I asked my question, and we'll see the clip here, Danielle Smith gave an answer, but then he, a former cop who'd worked the beat here, we'll go here right now. Yeah.
I lost my son to suicide in 1999. Had I had this opportunity as a parent back then, I would have taken whatever steps necessary to make sure that he was with us today.
It was extremely motivating and comforting and disarming to know that there were people like me who had made it out and who were completely willing to help me get there as well.
Our United Conservative Party has a bold vision and plan to address the mental health and addiction the challenges that we face.
Under the NDP, they actually, if you were an addict who was moving into treatment. Often you would end up having to spend $40 a day in order to access publicly funded AHS-provided treatment, which we found to be completely untenable. So we got rid of that right away. We're the first jurisdiction in Canada to have the virtual opioid dependency program. You make a phone call, you can be assessed by an addiction specialist, a doctor, and immediately you can walk to the closest pharmacy and for free get on opioid agonist therapy.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
The opioid pandemic is killing our young people. It is robbing a generation of children of their parents. And under the NDP, their solution was no treatment beds and a safe supply for which people could use to poison themselves to endure their long, slow suicide. Under the UCP, and I got to give Jason Kenney credit for this, and I don't often do things like this, but he did. He had a very, very specific worldview on drug treatment, as in, we have to get these people clean. We cannot allow them to languish in their suffering, because it is not just their suffering. For example, if you've given up on the addict, I get it, but they've got kids, and their kids deserve to have their parents back. And these people deserve, they're human beings, they're children of God. They're our fellow Albertans. They cannot live like this. It's a slow suicide, and it is a black hole that sucks everything around the addict into it. And Jason Kenney ramped up the amount of treatment beds available in this province by the thousands. And I'm so happy to see Danielle Smith continue with this. It's a crisis. It's a crisis. It's killing entire communities. And there are children and grandparents left behind to pick up the pieces, and the social decay that this causes. It's not just about the death of the addict and the suffering of the family of the addict. It's about the entire community that has to deal with the plague of crime that follows behind the addict and the people who sell the drugs to the addict. This is a game changer for so many families who feel absolutely helpless. They are saying, our loved one needs help. There's nothing we can do to help them. Now there finally is. And for people who say, Sheila, you are supposed to be about medical coercion. And you spend the last 3 years advocating for people who opposed medical coercion. This is not medical coercion. How dare you compare a welder who just wants to go to his job in camp without having to take ineffective medicine for a disease that won't even make him gravely ill to a dangerous drug addict who will burn down your house and stab you just as soon as they would say hello to you, who would drop fentanyl on the floor and their child would pick it up and overdose. Do not compare those two people. They are not the same.
Absolutely. And the way Mike Ellis termed it, and I don't think we'll jump to the clip just in case the debates start, but I asked this very question because I knew this is what the NDP and the critics would say. And he was crying, this minister, former police officer, tear-filled eyes, talking about holding mothers as they wept, unable to help their own children. And the terms he used, if we've got it right here.
Yeah. Officer that attended their homes where they were crying, saying they didn't know what to do. I've had mothers cry in my arms because they didn't know what to do with their children. Are we going to condemn a 12-year-old to a life of palliative care, and by giving them drugs, giving them a safe place to use these drugs? We have hope. This is what this offers, hope. Hope to these young kids, the kids that were back here, hope to these parents, so that those children will have something more than the continual and perpetual state of abuse. That's not a life to be given drugs and then given a safe place to use them and then given an naloxone kit and then sent on their way and then use the drugs again. That's what they're doing in Eastside Vancouver. I know that. I've been out there. And let's talk about this. These drugs are being diverted. We never talked about that. They're being diverted. And guess where they're being diverted to? The junior highs, the high schools, the post-secondaries. The only people benefiting from this are the drug dealers. The only people being disadvantaged by this is the rest of society and, quite frankly, the law enforcement community.
You know, I think what this boils down to, you know what? I guess the debate is starting live now. We're going to continue this conversation right when we come back, but let's go right over to the debate to ensure that we do not miss any of it. We wanted to ensure that you guys catch all of that. So we'll jump over right away.
For Albertans. We also have a fourth wildcard round. In addition, both CTV and Global News have been solicited questions from you, the voters. We've gotten hundreds of submissions and pared them down to 2. Aaron and I will put those questions to the leaders.
And there are some rules tonight, and here they are. Both parties have agreed to all of these rules for tonight's debate. Each leader will have 1 minute to make their opening remarks. Over the course of the hour, 10 questions are expected. Each will be directed at a specific leader who then has 45 seconds to respond. The other leader will have time for a rebuttal, followed by free debate.
And there will be an all-important countdown clock that the leaders can see here in studio with 30 seconds left in their answer, so they know when it is time to wrap up. And as we near the end of the debate, each leader will have time to make their closing remarks to Albertans.
Well, the speaking order tonight was determined by a random draw, and a reminder to Ms. Smith and Ms. Notley not to talk over one another. We want to ensure that the discussion can be heard clearly for our audience at home, and we're not going to hesitate to step in to ensure that that is the case.
All right, it is time to get started. First up tonight, Danielle Smith from the UCP with her opening remarks. Ms. Smith, you have 1 minute.
Good evening. Elections are about making important choices for you and your family. This election, Albertans have a choice between a UCP government that has lowered taxes, balanced the budget, and returned Alberta to its place as the economic powerhouse of Canada. Or we can choose to go backward with the same failed NDP policies that hiked taxes, drove out jobs and investment, and almost bankrupted our province. We can't afford to go back. We need to go forward. If elected, the UCP will continue to make life more affordable by cutting your personal income taxes and extending the fuel tax holiday. We'll crack down on criminals with more officers on the ground and ankle bracelet monitoring of violent offenders out on bail. And we will continue to invest in healthcare and mental health addiction treatment while ensuring no Albertan ever has to pay out of pocket to see a family doctor. Alberta's opportunities are endless, and I know our best days are still ahead. Thank you, and I look forward to the debate.
Ms. Smith, thank you so much. The floor is now yours, Ms. Notley, for your opening remarks.
To begin, I want to thank our firefighters and say that my thoughts are with those Albertans who are out of their homes right now. Tonight, I want to talk about a better future for Alberta, where we fix healthcare, lower household costs, and create jobs. This election is about trust, and it's about leadership. You know you can't trust Danielle Smith, so my offer to you is this. I will work every day to be the premier you deserve, creating jobs and diversifying for the future. I won't raise your taxes. I will cap your bills. I won't fund a war room. I will fund an emergency room. And I won't ever make you pay to see a doctor. I'll protect our health care, protect our mountains, and protect your pension. And having learned today that Danielle Smith broke the law, I will also protect our law, and I will never break it. When I say something, I mean it, and that's the difference between Danielle and me.
Ms. Notley, thank you for your opening remarks. Well, affordability, rising interest rates, and inflation have been top of mind. Big issue for a lot of Alberta families struggling to make ends meet.
The first series of questions tonight are based on that issue, and question number 1 goes to Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
Thank you. This first question is for UCP leader Danielle Smith. We've been dealing with an affordability crisis for over a year. We have seen temporary measures put in place, including rebates and affordability payments, which are only applied to some Albertans. What will you do to support all Albertans with the rising cost of living as inflation continues to have a real impact?
One of the first things that we knew we needed to do was address the inflation crisis created, let's be fair, by the Liberal NDP coalition in Ottawa, spending too much money, driving up the cost of everything. And there's only so much we can do here. So we gave $600 affordability payments. We gave a rebate on fuel taxes to offset the federal carbon tax. And we also made sure that we were going to put on electricity rebates so that people paid less on their power bills. What we have to do going forward is more than that. We know we're going to continue to see an increase in the federal carbon tax. That's why we're going to offer an 8% personal income tax rate. Brings us pretty much in alignment with Alberta or with Ontario and British Columbia. It'll give $1,500 per family, and we'll also extend that fuel tax rebate until the end of the year.
Okay, Ms. Smith, thank you. The same question to you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you. You know, under the UCP, the fact is that most Albertans' utility bills look more like a mortgage payment. And your insurance costs for your car, well, that looks more like what you save up for your whole summer vacation. Now, those costs were under control when we were in government because we had put caps in place to protect Alberta families. Unfortunately, the UCP chose to remove them, and now costs are spiraling. So we're going to help. We're going to put a cap back on car insurance, not a pretend one like Danielle Smith did a couple months ago, but a real one. And we're going to help families reduce their utilities. And most importantly, we will never, ever, ever make them pay to see a family doctor.
All right, Ms. Notley, thank you. We're going to open it up to the first free debate on this issue tonight, starting with Ms. Smith.
And a UCP government will never, ever make you pay for a family doctor either. What we also won't do is cause an increase in your power bills. Ms. Notley is not taking responsibility for the fact that she created the power bill crisis. At the time, Alberta Party leader said it was the biggest mistake of the NDP government because of their ideological changes. By phasing out coal early, they added $2 billion to the cost of your power bill. And as a result, we're seeing the consequences of that today, and she's not stopped. She's going she wants to achieve the 2035 net zero target put forward by Justin Trudeau. That'll cost $52 billion and increase your power bill another 40%. We can't afford to do that.
Well, you know, here's the thing. We actually put a cap in place, and we did that so that people's utilities and their electricity wouldn't get out of control. And it got out of control when the UCP removed the cap. But let's talk about something else, though. Let's talk about healthcare costs as they impact affordability. You claim that you won't raise costs, but Danielle, you know, I've known you for at least a decade, perhaps more, and I've watched your career, and you have argued passionately in multiple settings for your belief that you care about passionately, those were your words, making people pay more for their health care. So my question to you is, why are you not running on the thing that you believe? Why are you not being honest with Albertans? Why aren't you making the argument that you think having them pay more is what you want? Because you've said it in video, in papers, in speaking tours, in the legislature for over a decade.
Ms. Smith, we're going to let you jump in here.
I know Ms. Notley likes to show grainy videos of things I said while I was on radio, and the reason she does that is she doesn't want to run on her record. And the reason she doesn't want to run on her record is it was an absolute disaster. She racked up $70 billion in debt, more debt than any premier, actually all premiers combined in Alberta's provincial history. She talked about deception. Did you remember her running on a carbon tax in the last election? I sure didn't. And that increased the cost of everything. We eliminated it, but Justin Trudeau wouldn't let us keep it off. And now Ms. Notley has not stood up to her boss, Jagmeet Singh, in Ottawa, and worked with us to say don't increase that carbon tax any further. And in fact, certainly don't increase it 300%. No one has any credibility talking about affordability as long as they support a carbon tax, which is going to increase the cost of everything.
Ms. Smith, I'm sorry. You talk about grainy videos, but actually we had high definition 18 months ago when those videos of you arguing for people to pay for their health care came out. And you know what? We had high definition when you said you wanted to sell our hospitals across Calgary. And you know what? We had high definition a week ago when your deputy premier said that he thought people should pay to use the emergency room.
We're going to have to leave this right here. We got a lot to get to tonight. We've got to move on.
And our next question comes from Courtney Terrio from City News. Courtney.
Thank you. This question is for NDP leader Rachel Notley. Now, no matter the provider or contract situation, utility costs remain high here in Alberta. Now, I know you both touched on previous policies, but my question is, what can government do to bring down the actual cost of utilities going forward?
Well, that's a very good question. And what we absolutely have to do is find a way to reduce those costs. A lot of Albertans aren't aware that in the pre-election period, the UCP put a cap on what folks are paying for their electricity just for the last 4 months. What they don't know is that, in fact, come June, they're going to have to pay that back. And that's going to cost about half of Alberta families about $200 million. So the first thing that we will do is we will actually have those families' backs, and we won't force them to pay back the cost of Danielle Smith's pre-election attempt at distracting people from what UCP policy has done to their utilities. But then going forward, we have to find a way to keep those costs lower.
All right, Ms. Notley, that's your 45 seconds. A rebuttal to you, Ms. Smith, 45 seconds.
Well, the first thing is that we have to build a power grid based on it being reliable and affordable as opposed to based on ideology. We have a federal government that is propped up by the NDP that has put war on natural gas. Our power grid here is almost 90% natural gas, and yet we have a federal government that wants us to be able to be completely abated on natural gas by 2035. That is the commitment that Ms. Notley has signed on to. She wants to achieve that. That's going to cost $52 billion and increase our power bills 40%. The other thing that's going to happen is they also want us to phase off completely in their new green building strategy, phase completely off natural gas, which one of the presidents of our large companies has said would cost another $75 billion. That is not the way to get affordable energy for Albertans.
Okay, Ms. Notley, you now have the floor for your rebuttal.
Well, thank you very much. Well, let me just say, first of all, that the numbers that Ms. Smith are throwing around are numbers that have been fully discredited. And they've actually been discredited by the people that the UCP hired to come up with the numbers. Almost the day after they came up with those numbers, the firm came out and said, nope, those weren't right. And in fact, the other report that they were relying on was also deeply flawed. What we know is that there is roughly $16 trillion of international investment floating around out there looking to invest in renewable energy. And if we are going to be forward-looking, if we are going to create jobs, if we are going to position our economy for the future, we need to go out there and get that investment. We can't look backwards. We have to plan forwards. That's who Albertans are. Now, when we did the phase out of coal, and we increased renewable energy in Alberta so successfully when we were in government, we controlled utility costs for the sole purpose of making sure consumers didn't pay the cost, and that's exactly what we would do again.
All right, Ms. Smith, shaking your head during much of that. You have the floor.
Well, I know Ms. Notley says she believes in science and she believes in experts, but somehow the expert that the Alberta electric system operator she wants to discredit. But you notice that she didn't disavow the 2035 target for net zero, even though the Saskatchewan NDP did. Saskatchewan NDP voted with Premier Scott Moe saying it is unachievable. If we want to have a realistic plan, a practical plan, we have to fight back against Ottawa. This candidate will not. We have to fight back against Ottawa and make sure that we put a target that's reasonable, realistic, and achievable, and that's carbon neutrality by 2050. That's the policy of our party, and that is the way that we're going to make sure that we maintain reliability, affordability, and that we actually achieve our targets.
We'll get you back in here, Ms. Notley.
Well, you know, Ms. Smith, I know you're keen on fighting. You want to fight with Ottawa. You want to fight with the media. You want to fight, frankly, with your former self. It's actually quite exhausting. Here's what I need Albertans to know. I will always stand up for Alberta. I will always stand up for the interests of Albertans. I did that when I was Premier. I made sure we got a pipeline to Tidewater, the first one in 50 years. I did that standing up against the BC government. I did it standing up with a federal government, and that's my record, and that will also be my blueprint. So, Ms. Smith, you know, I just have to say I disagree with so much of what you had to say there.
One last word to Smith on this topic.
Well, Ms. Notley didn't stand up when Justin Trudeau cancelled Northern Gateway. She didn't stand up when Energy East pulled the plug. She didn't stand up when they brought in a tanker ban off the West Coast for our product, and she didn't stand up when the No More Pipelines bill was passed.
Well,
she will not stand up.
In fact, you know that's not true. You commented on the fact that I made submissions to the Senate. You know that that's what I did on both of those issues.
It was too late, and I must must tell you, where do you think Justin Trudeau got the idea for just transition and for an emissions cap and for a carbon tax? He got it from Ms. Notley when she was Premier, and she's going to continue to implement these same kind of policies, and she's going to walk in lockstep with Justin Trudeau on making sure that they get implemented, and that's only going to harm our economy.
All right, that is all the time we have for this topic, and in fact for this portion of the debates.
And when we come back, we will be talking more about healthcare and the economy. Please stay with us.
EPAC brings you Charles R., The Making of a Monarch, an intimate look at the life.
While they go to commercial, but I've got some initial thoughts there. My first thing is something I noticed as a woman. Why are they dressed the same? Like, Notley, you should be wearing orange or just something. You know that the Conservative in Canada is always going to show up in blue, right? It's in, like, same in the United States, the Republican always wears a red tie. She literally showed up to an event wearing the same outfit as Smith. It's like showing up wearing white to a wedding. What are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing? But also I noticed, again, this is just something superficial, but it is, everything is considered in a debate, right? So you notice Notley is talking to Smith, but Smith is talking to Albertans. She's not turning to talk to Notley. Notley's turning to argue with her. Smith seems sort of aloof and above that. Very interesting choice. Their appearances also, I noticed Notley's hair and makeup. It's almost jarring, right? Like, it's the first thing you notice and you're like, that looks weird. But Smith, her hair and makeup looks really natural and bouncy and youthful. Like, this is her, like, you're getting the natural Danielle Smith and nothing is put on and fake. And maybe it's just because I deeply dislike the NDP, but I'm getting Notley, her appearance is very put on and fake and contrived. That's the ladies' perspective of the debate here. Adam, what do you got?
Well, I think what I propose would likely happen is Danielle Smith trying to stick to issues and saying that the NDP is trying to go for personal attacks. There is quite a bit of irony there in Rachel Notley saying that Smith just wants to fight, where Rachel Notley and the NDP have been the one who've been slinging. It's very much what we've seen. Rachel Notley says that she's standing for the media, or rather that Rachel Notley's willing to answer questions from the media, and then she has people arrested. She accuses Danielle Smith of hiding from the media. She says that Danielle Smith always wants to fight. Meanwhile, she's the one slinging allegations. I think the debate is live now again, so we can hop right back to that.
A family doctor.
That topic is front and center in this segment of the debate, beginning with a question from CBC's Judy Aldis.
Thank you, and good evening. Fixing healthcare isn't just about spending more money, it's about designing a more responsive and effective system. So, beyond dollars spent, what are your creative and transformative approaches to restoring confidence in the system for Albertans? And Ms. Smith, we'll let you have the first crack at that question.
When I first got elected, I was being told that the AHS system was on the brink of collapse. You had unions saying that we needed to go back to mandates and start masking kids in school. And I said, absolutely not. We are not going back to that. If the problem is AHS, then let's fix AHS. So we talked to doctors and nurses and paramedics on the front line. We listened to them and we implemented their ideas. And guess what? It's working. Hospital wait times are down. EMS response times are down. We've effectively ended red alerts for EMS in both of our major cities. Ambulances in rural are staying in rural, and we're reducing surgical wait times. We're going to be able to keep this going. And if we continue at this rate, we will have completely eliminated our surgical backlog by this time next year and be the first province in the country to do so.
And your rebuttal now, Ms. Notley.
Well, I will say Albertans have had enough of driving hundreds of kilometers to get the emergency care, obstetric care, cardiac care, any kind of care that they need. They're tired of looking for doctors. They're tired of 15-hour waits in the emergencies rooms. And they're particularly tired of having the UCP tell them, oh, the problem's fixed. There is no problem. There is a problem. We've put forward a reasonable, practical solution. The answer is to get more Albertans access to a family doctor. By doing that, with our costed plan, we can take the pressure off of our emergency rooms, off of our surgical wait times, off of our ambulances, and we can also make sure that nobody ever, ever, ever has to pay to see a family doctor.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Notley. Once again, let's dive back into the free debate portion where you're free to challenge each other's policies, beginning with Ms. Smith.
You know, I heard of all of the things that Ms. Notley mentioned when I was in politics last time in 2012, and she had 4 years to fix it, and she didn't. She didn't listen to the front line. All she did was continue to build the bureaucracy, and she didn't get to local decision making. She didn't get to local control. We did. We heard from paramedics what they wanted us to do, and it was actually very straightforward. We had to make sure that they had the ability to drop patients off when they arrived on the site so that they can get back out and be there for you when you needed them. And that was a very straightforward idea that came from the front lines. And Ms. Notley had an opportunity to fix healthcare. She didn't. We're beginning on this pathway. We're making great progress, and we need to have another mandate to continue it.
Ms. Notley will get you in on this.
Yes, no, well, quite honestly, as I said before, Albertans are so frustrated when they're told that there isn't a problem and everything has been fixed. The reality is things have gotten considerably worse over the last 4 years. The UCP cut funding dramatically. They ripped up the deal with the doctors. They told nurses that they needed to be laid off. They threatened to lay off 10,000 frontline healthcare workers, and then COVID hit. So, and the result, unfortunately, is we've got whole cities without access to family doctors. We've got just last week we had 15-hour waits in emergency rooms all across Calgary, and we recently, just this year, half as many doctors are accepting new patients. So there is a problem. It's very real, and selling our hospitals and forcing people to pay for private care is not the solution.
Ms. Smith, you want back in? Yeah, go ahead.
Look, we signed a deal with the Alberta Medical Association. Our health minister negotiated that we were going to have 25% of our doctors on an alternative payment system within the next 5 years. And that allows for team practice. It allows for nurse practitioners and LPNs, psychologists and other health practitioners to work together in a team practice so that more access will be given on primary care. We put $2 billion towards this, and we're making great progress. We have more health professionals today than we did when Ms. Notley left office, 8,500 more, in fact, including 700 more doctors. And in April, our plan to recognize credentials is working. We had 1,400 nurses who are now licensed and able to practice in Alberta, more than any time in the previous 3 years. The system is working. We've got much more work to do. We know that, but we've got to continue on the work that we have, because I've got the courage. I've got the courage to talk to the front line, and I've got the courage to be able to implement some of the suggestions that they make. Ms. Notley has demonstrated.
All right, we're just going to leave it at that question because we have another one on health right now.
You bet. Our next question is from Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
There is already a lot of private delivery in our public healthcare system, which has existed under the NDP and UCP governments. What criteria would you apply to determine when expanded private delivery is appropriate? And we'll go to Ms. Notley first, please.
Well, honestly, I mean, at this point, what we would always look at is to get the best care for the greatest number of people in the most efficient and cost-effective way. Now, as you may know, there was a study that came out today, just today, on the success of the Alberta government's surgical care initiative. And what they concluded was that the number of surgeries went down and the cost went up. Now, that's not entirely surprising, because most often when you engage in experimentation with privatization, that's what happens. It's the same thing that's going on with the lab situation in Calgary right now. With the UCP's intention to increase private lab services, we now see Calgarians waiting up to a month to get a simple blood test. It doesn't work. We need to focus on public health care.
All right, Ms. Notley, that is your 45 seconds. Ms. Smith, over to you.
We need to have publicly funded health care for both doctors and doctor-run surgical centers. We have 300,000 surgeries being done per year. 60,000 of them are in doctor-run surgical centers that Ms. Notley apparently wants to shut down. She hasn't answered the question about how we would be able to replace those surgeries. And I can tell you what is actually happening, because a lot has changed since November when we started making these changes in healthcare. What has happened, in fact, is that we identified that there were 39,000 people waiting waiting longer than medically recommended. We've been cutting that list down by 3,000 surgeries per month. We're now down to 30,000 people waiting. And as I said, if we continue at this pace, those waits will be completely over by this time next year. And I think that's something to celebrate and continue.
Okay, let's open up the floor now to some free debate. Let's start with you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I think that we need to understand that there is a very, very serious problem, and we are not a year away from fixing all these problems. Ms. Smith, unfortunately, is playing a bit with the statistics. Last November, we had a COVID wave and a flu wave, and she's now comparing statistics to that period of time. It's a seasonal change that she's trying to convince is turning into a long-term trend, but it's not real. What is real is that this year, or this spring, BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba filled all of their residency spots for family doctors. Alberta, for the first time, had 45 vacancies. And then they offered them up again, and there were still vacancies. And we don't have family doctors coming to work here in Alberta. And the reason is because Ms. Smith is doing things like referring to them as tyrants and suggesting that people who follow public health orders are Nazi sympathizers. And these things undermine the ability to attract frontline healthcare professionals. They don't feel respected, and they don't feel that this government is at all focused on science and having their back.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Our doctors, nurses, paramedics, and other health professionals are the heroes of our healthcare system. Everybody knows that. What I find so interesting is that Ms. Notley isn't running at all on her record from when she was premier, because she would have to admit that surgical wait times actually went up for 9 key surgeries. She'd have to admit that she didn't actually have the courage to take on the challenge of reforming healthcare. We're already making progress. Of course, there's much more to do, but I am confident that with a new mandate, we'll be able to continue making this progress. The next step, of course, is building out our primary care system, building out continuing care, and adding more home care so that people can age in place, and making sure that we've got that team practice so that anybody has access to health care when they need it.
Ms. Notley, care to respond?
Yes, well, I mean, I think the fundamental problem here is that Albertans are deeply concerned at the notion of a Danielle Smith-led government reforming healthcare in any way, shape, or form. She claims she's guaranteed that nobody will ever pay for a doctor, but, you know, Ms. Smith, I was with you in the legislature in 2014. You stood up and you guaranteed you would never cross the floor. 3 weeks later, you crossed the floor. Your understanding of the word guarantee is very different than that of most Albertans. And most people are deeply, deeply troubled at the prospect of you reforming healthcare based on your 15-year record of advocating to make people pay out of pocket.
Okay, we are there out of time for this one issue, but we're going to move on. And economy, definitely something that many Albertans are concerned about as we head forward, given the historic reliance on the oil and gas sector for jobs and government revenue, the world beginning to shift away from petroleum products.
Economy and jobs are the key issue in this portion of the debate. With the first question, here is Courtney Terrio from City News.
Now, both of you have made many promises in this election, committing to billions in new spending. With the price of oil sitting below budget projections at various times this year, and given that volatility, how will you pay for these commitments and stay on budget without steep cuts? That first question going to Ms. Smith.
Well, I must say, I know Aaron in the intro talked about shifting away from petroleum products, and I would say that that is the Notley view of the world. That is certainly not my government's view of the world. We believe that we are going to reduce emissions, not that we are going to reduce oil and natural gas. We know that with all of the exciting things that are happening with carbon capture, utilization and storage and all the green technology, we can continue to have a robust, vibrant oil and natural gas sector for years to come. What we want to do is make sure that we're finding more opportunities for our products, having bitumen be used more for asphalt so it reduces the amount of emissions, having LNG export, which creates a brand new stream of income for us. We know that as long as we keep our energy industry strong, we're going to keep Alberta's economy strong. Ms. Notley won't do that. I will.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Ms. Notley, your rebuttal.
Well, you know, there was actually some elements of what Ms. Smith said that I actually agree with. You know, I want to create jobs producing energy. I want to create jobs upgrading our energy, and I want to create jobs reducing emissions. And reducing emissions is absolutely the focus. It's not about reducing or production, it is about emissions. The difference is that Ms. Smith and her caucus have spent much of their career pitting emissions reduction efforts against economic growth. And when we do that, we fail on both. What we want to do is understand the economic opportunity that comes from investing in emissions reductions, attracting investment from other parts of the world, and growing jobs while ensuring greater markets for our oil and gas.
All right, thank you, Ms. Notley. Let's go back to our free debate format right now on this economic question. Ms. Smith, to you.
Ms. Notley has so many anti-oil and gas candidates, I have lost count, including one who compared it to slavery. And I know he hasn't apologized yet, nor have you, or condemned his comments. What I would say is that when you take a position of increasing business taxes, you're creating a lot of uncertainty in our sector. We took the 12% tax that Ms. Notley had imposed, brought it down to 8%, and look what happened. Year over year, we ended up diversifying our economy, attracting more investment, creating more jobs. More people are coming into this province than ever before, and what a bonus. We now have more corporate income revenue than we have in our history, $6.4 billion. When you reduce taxes, you end up attracting jobs and investment and people. When you increase taxes, you chase it away. She wants to increase taxes again. We can't let her do that.
Ms. Notley.
Well, 2 points there. First of all, I find it deeply ironic that Ms. Smith is talking about uncertainty and its impact on attracting investment. This is a person who, well, started by bringing in the Sovereignty Act, an act that her former finance minister very clearly said was going to chase away investment because it undermined the rule of law. That, of course, was before she was found today to have broken the law in an effort to support the private interests of someone accused of wanting to promote violence against the police. All of that chases away investment because it is such a profound compromise to the rule of law. But also, let me talk for just a moment about the issue of corporate taxes. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to take the lowest corporate taxes in the country and move them to be the lowest corporate taxes in the country. Lower than Scott Moe's, lower than Doug Ford's. And at the same time, we will have the income necessary to rebuild our education, rebuild our post-secondary, and invest appropriately in a stable system of healthcare. And
the small business tax is zero
and attracts
in Saskatchewan, by the way.
Ms. Notley, it's you and the CBC who need to apologize for Albertans. You flat out lied for several months saying that I and my office had contact Crown prosecutors. She said that is absolutely not true. And she also confirmed that I did not direct or interfere in any COVID-related cases. I would say that we have increased the amount of investment that has happened in our province. We have a $760 million renewable diesel project announced by Imperial. We have $600 million that came in from McCain's. Our Pathways Oil Sands Group is investing. We have an increase in the amount of drilling rigs. That is not a sign that people have lost confidence in our economy. You know what it is a sign of? That when you stand up to Ottawa and you tell the industry that you're going to stand up for them, they actually increase their amount of confidence and they increase their investment.
Except that we have fewer corporate headquarters in Calgary, in Alberta now than we did before in 2019, before you announced your incredibly spendthrift corporate handout.
Notley drove away ConocoPhillips, TC Energy, and Canada Shell, Kinder Morgan.
From Judy Aldis of CBC.
Trident exploration.
You've both
she
mentioned the desire to reduce emissions. Both of your parties have signaled the desire, in fact, to move towards a net zero future. So, Ms. Notley, we'll start with you. Can you outline for us specific actions that you will take to make sure that that happens?
Well, that's a very good question. So let me first point out, in contrast to what Ms. Smith had said previously, is that I was actually the first political leader in Alberta over a year ago to speak out on behalf of Albertans and point out that the draft emissions targets coming from the federal government were unrealistic. I do, however, believe that we need to come up with a Made in Alberta plan that includes practical, achievable emissions limits, and then we need to find and incent the investment. We have to compete with the U.S. and the Inflation Reduction Act to get that investment, but there's a lot out there, and we have some of that set out in our platform, but there's more to do.
Okay, Ms. Smith, you're up next.
Actually, what Ms. Notley has said is that she believes we need an emissions cap and that it needs to be very close to what the federal government is proposing. The federal government is proposing a 42% emissions cap reduction by 2030, which we know is a de facto production cap. And if we have a production cap, it means that we're going to reduce the overall amount of revenues. She has also confirmed, and not denied it this evening, that she agrees with the federal proposal for a net zero power grid by 2035, which we know will cost $52 billion and increase your electricity bills by 40%. We have seen this newsreel before. It's why she doesn't want to talk about her record. When she came in, increased the corporate tax, brought through a surprise carbon tax, increased personal income taxes, 183,000 jobs were lost in the first couple of years.
Well, let me just say, first of all, when we talk about my record in oil and gas, I think it's kind of hard to forget the big thing, which is the first pipeline to Tidewater in 50 years. That's my record. So that's the first thing. Secondly, your numbers around job losses. I think we need to kind of talk a little bit about that, Danielle. Many experts have reviewed that, and they've said they're absolutely ridiculous. In fact, at the end of our term, we had, after a very difficult recession, we came out about 45,000 jobs ahead. And if we were to use your means of coming up with that 180,000 number, the number of jobs lost under the UCP would be over 250,000. So I think Albertans really deserve leadership that will not try to mislead them, but will actually have conversations based on applicable and relevant facts.
Ms. Smith, back to you.
Sure, I'm happy to use the same measure because if you look at our measure, we have increased our net jobs 136,000 since the UCP got elected. So that's, by my count, I guess, 3 times what Ms. Notley was able to do. And there's a reason for that, is because investor confidence has returned. People know that if you elect a UCP government, you're going to get lower corporate taxes. We're not going to come through with surprise taxes. In fact, we're going to have a tax hike guarantee so that if there is ever a proposal for an increase in carbon tax or personal taxes or sales taxes, it has to be put to the people, because these kinds of policies end up chasing away investment, and it costs average taxpayers and it costs average citizens the most. Ms. Notley won't agree to that, and it's the reason for that is she wants to increase corporate taxes, which are going to, once again, chase out investment just like it did last time.
Don't want to cut you off, but I want to get Ms. Notley in here.
When the UCP announced their multi-billion-dollar corporate handout to corporations, here's what happened. We lost 50,000 jobs, we doubled the deficit, and the economy slowed down. 4 years later, we have fewer corporate headquarters than we started out with. So the fact of the matter is we have lower we will still, under our plan, have lower corporate taxes than Scott Moe, than Doug Ford. But what we'll also have is the money to invest in our education system, something that's been horrifically starved under the UCP, restore funding to our post-secondary, a critical partner in economic growth and diversification.
We're going to have to end this portion of the debate.
All right, up next, our viewer and wildcard questions. We're going to shift gears a little bit. You're watching the Alberta Provincial Leaders Debate. Back in just 2 minutes.
So we can say a lot about...
I got a little bit animated there.
Yeah. That's good. That's what we're here for. Before we talk about economics, I do want to touch on the healthcare thing, and then we'll get on to this. But it's incredibly interesting, and this is so characteristic overall. I think most of us would agree healthcare isn't working. There's significant changes needed. But it is incredible to see that even though there was this quote-unquote pandemic and there's all these additional problems, despite all that the UCP has managed to make these small improvements, bring in nurses, cut down emergency times. The NDP hired a lot of bureaucrats, but they didn't seem to address this. We had a whole fixahs.ca campaign, and we listed about, I think it was 7 or 8 key points that need to be tackled. The UCP then seemingly listened and started tackling some of these things. They're making improvements. It's interesting. It is so characteristic of the overall positions of both parties. The UCP saying, we're going to fix these things. We're going to bring people in, small, minor ameliorations towards improvement. The NDP is like the Oprah approach, and they're saying free doctors. Everyone gets a doctor. There's not really a practical step-by-step, here's what we're doing, here's the improvement. It's these massive sweeping promises that are largely unattainable.
Yeah, but Matt, sweeping promises to do more of the same. Excusez-moi, but I don't want to listen to Rachel Notley talk about frontline workers when she advocated for laying off all the unvaccinated ones. I'm sorry, it's a bit rich for me. And if Notley is looking for the culprit behind the lack of head offices in Calgary, I think the phone calls coming from inside the house between if you look at the NDP Liberal coalition, off the top of my head, I'm able to list, and maybe it's just because I'm an oil patch wife, so I know these things. They drove away ConocoPhillips, TC Energy, Encana, Shell, Kinder Morgan, Trident, and Houston O&G. All of them left Calgary. So if Notley's wondering, why are there no head offices? Look in the mirror, sister. You did it. Go ahead.
Politicians with these ideologies, if you're anti-oil, if you're anti-policing, if you're anti all these things, and then crime increases and oil businesses go away, that shouldn't come as a surprise. Back to the debate.
It is time to tackle a pair of questions from our audience that we gathered ahead of time.
This question looks at education in Alberta, and this was submitted from Ray Laser from Calgary. Ray wants to know, how specifically is your party going to address the increased enrollment, teacher burnout, increased class sizes, and complexity in Alberta school classrooms? Ms. Smith, we're going to begin with you.
We have had so much disruption in our education system in the last 3 years. One of the first things I wanted to do is restore stability to the learning environment for our kids. We know one of the most difficult things that our young people are facing is social anxiety and mental health. And so that's part of the reason why we now spend more money than we ever have in our history on education. We have invested in complexity funding for classrooms so that school boards can decide what the best use of that is, whether hiring more teachers or having education assistants or other psychologists. And we're going to make sure that we continue to build more schools. We've built or modernized 106 new schools, and we're going to keep on doing that. Under the Notley government, they only built 47 schools.
Okay, Ms. Notley.
So much of that's not true, but let me start with this. I have watched for 4 years with great alarm what the UCP has been doing to our school system. I imagine a 6-year-old child in grade 1 in a class that unfortunately has 28, 29, 31, 32 children in it, and she puts her hand up to get help, and she waits for a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and nobody comes. So she puts it down, and it happens a few more times, and she stops trying. Over the last 4 years, we've had 35,000 net new children enter our schools, and the UCP have not hired a single new teacher. In fact, they fired some, and they also fired about 10,000 educational assistants by tweet. We have a plan to fix this, and I look forward to talking more about it.
All right, Ms. Notley, that is your 45 seconds. Let's go to free debate now. Ms. Smith.
Well, I think that what people might be forgetting is we did have a lot of disruption over the last few years, and that's part of the reason we need to have stability back in our system. I don't think teachers forget, though, that under Ms. Notley, they got no wage increases, 0% year after year. Under UCP government, we gave them a much-deserved 3.75% wage increase. And I think that that's what we're hearing from the front line. They want to be respected, they want to be supported with educational assistance, and they also want to have a little bit of stability so that they have time to deal with the very severe mental health crisis of our kids.
Heads, jump in there, please.
Yeah, there have been profound funding cuts to our education system under the UCP. We now have the most crowded classrooms in the country. That was not the case when we left office, but it is the case now. They, as I said, fired 10,000 educational assistants by tweet on a weekend. They also, in order to cut their budget, they did it on the backs of vulnerable children with disabilities ages 3 to 6 by cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from PUF funding. What that meant is that kids all across our province are falling through the cracks. I've been to schools where teachers and EAs are crying about what they can't get a handle on. So the stress wasn't COVID. The stress is this government. We have a plan to hire 4,000 teachers to try to catch up over the next 4 years, 3,000 more EAs, and to restore PUF funding.
All right, let's get Smith back in there.
Well, I would say that Ms. Notley had the opportunity to address class size, and indeed she put forward a proposal to do exactly that, a proposal that the Auditor General said was so badly implemented they couldn't actually track whether it was successful or not, and didn't actually know where the funding went. We know that the very best people to make the decision about what ought to happen in the classroom are our locally elected school trustees. That's why we're giving more funding for mental mental health, more funding for complexity, more funding for transportation, making sure that every school district has the funding it needs to make its own decisions about what the best mix in the classroom is so that they can meet the local needs.
All right, that is our time for that. Unfortunately, we have to get to our next viewer question, and here it is.
And this question comes from Alex Hamilton from Edmonton. Alex says, please tell us one specific policy your opponent has put forward that you agree with, and why?
This is the worst.
Well, you know, that's a really good question. And I will say this, and I've said it before. It's actually two. I'm going to go with two. So, you know, very early on in the UCP mandate, it was under the former Premier Jason Kenney, they introduced the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation as a means to expand Indigenous participation in our economy. We like it. We're going to expand it, and we're going to expand the number of opportunities that would qualify for that kind of support with Indigenous communities across the province. Another one was they expanded funding of the film and TV tax credit, and that was a good idea. It's brought more excitement into our industry. We will absolutely maintain that, and we look forward to it.
All right, thanks very much, Ms. Notley. Ms. Smith, once again, specific policies that you agree with for the NDP.
I'm very proud of both of the initiatives that Ms. Notley mentioned. The Indigenous Opportunities Corporation has been so successful, I think, in addressing true economic reconciliation. And the film and TV tax credit brought The Last of Us here, which I think all of us feel pretty excited when we watch that on the big screen. What I think Ms. Notley and I would agree with is that we know that there are a number of doctors who are now wanting to specialize, and I completely understand. A lot of time goes into becoming a doctor, and so we're seeing fewer doctors go into family medicine. And so I think we would both agree that we need to move towards team practice, that we need to make sure that we've got team practices for family doctors to work with nurse practitioners, LPNs, and other health professionals to ensure everybody gets the health care they need without having to pay for it.
Okay, thank you both. It doesn't really lend itself to much free debate, that question, but we're glad that we got that one in that because we really like that one. So let's head to our next question.
And this is a wild card question on a theme that's outside of our main topics.
Here's Lisa Johnson from Post Media.
Thank you. This election may be decided by who Albertans trust more. Ms. Notley, based on the NDP's fiscal record in government, there are some people who don't trust you to manage Alberta's finances. And Ms. Smith, you were found today to have broken conflict of interest rules. Why should Albertans trust you? Ms. Smith, this question goes to you first.
Well, first, what I would say is that when Ms. Notley campaigned last time around, she didn't tell anybody she was going to increase the carbon tax. She brought in a business tax, and she also ended up running up more debt than we've seen of any premier in our province's history. And the results speak for themselves. We saw 183,000 jobs lost in the first couple of years. We had a number of people moving out. We had 13 quarters of people leaving this province. In fact, the energy minister at the time said, well, if you can't find a job in Alberta, go work in BC for a while. That kind of defeatist attitude is not what Alberta is all about. Alberta is back on track. We have more people coming in here than ever before. Our Alberta is Calling campaign is working. We've got more diversification in business investment. We've got to keep that going.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Smith. Ms. Notley, the floor is yours.
First of all, let me say, I guess there's two things. First of all, I was very pleased to roll out a pretty well thought out costing document for our platform. And that document ensures that over 3 years, we would maintain a cumulative surplus of $3.6 billion. That is in contrast to what the UCP hurriedly rushed out today, which would actually very possibly go into deficit in the third year and is considerably smaller surplus than what we're proposing. And so that calls into question many of the items that they're proposing to Albertans. The other thing I would say, I've been in office since 2008. I have never actually breached the conflict of interest legislation. Ms. Smith cannot say the same.
Well, I guess you did have an MLA who hacked our healthcare system. I can tell you.
Do you really want to talk about our candidates and our MLAs?
Well,
like seriously, I do not think you're going to win that one. That is not one you want to do.
I have to tell you, when putting together our affordability payments, to have to ask whether it was going to be hack-proof from the NDP, that's not something that Ms. Notley should be very proud of. What I will also say is that when she came out with her costing document, it was was almost immediately discredited because Todd Hirsch said he hadn't done the analysis on what kind of impact it would have on chasing away investment. Others did. Trevor Toome did. Jack Mintz did. There are several business reporters who did. The Alberta Chamber of Commerce did. And what they have said is that would create instability. And the instability would chase additional investment out. It would chase jobs out. And we would go back and have a rerun of what we did in the period of time that Ms. Notley doesn't want to talk about, which was when she was Premier.
All right, Ms. Notley obviously has thoughts on this. Back to you.
I do, yes. I mean, obviously, the fact of the matter is that many of those people backpedaled on some of that. The credit union has actually said there's not a problem with the increase of the corporate income tax to being the lowest corporate income tax in the country. And indeed, it seems to work okay in Ontario, because heaven knows they are attracting far more venture capital and business than we are in Alberta under the UCP. But I do want to go back to this issue of the conflict of interest legislation. This is a fundamentally important issue. Ms. Smith, you were found to have broken the law in order to interfere with the system of justice to assist with somebody who had been charged with attempting to get people to commit violence against police officers.
We're going to let you
so
get a
you
word
talk
in
about
here, Ms. Smith.
instability. That does not engender trust. That, more than that,
Ms.
it
Smith,
engenders
please go ahead.
fear on the part of Albertans.
Ms. Notley, the NDP, and the CBC lied for months, saying that I was calling Crown prosecutors and my staff are calling Crown prosecutors, and it wasn't true. And that is what the Ethics Commissioner found. Look, I'm a non-lawyer, and I know that I need to be able to talk to my Justice Minister. I'm looking forward to advice on how to be able to do that more constructively in the future. I think that's important for us to be able to get those kind of rules set out. But I will say, we continue to have this issue. I am running on my record. Ms. Notley is running away from hers, and there is a reason for that. The Global Petroleum Survey is one of the surveys that looks at what our business environment looks like. When she got elected in 2015, we were number 3 in the world. By 2018, we were number 43 in the world. This is the reason she doesn't want to talk about her record.
Forgive us, we are running out of time. We're almost at the end of the debate, so we do have to move on.
We do. We have one final wild card question, and here is City TV's Courtney Theriault.
Well, thanks again. Both parties have insisted they would increase the number of police officers in major centers. But on the surface, that would only allow them to better respond to crimes as they're committed. So in terms of creating safer communities, beyond boots on the ground, what distinguishes your approach from your opponents? And we'll go to Ms. Notley first.
Well, that's a really very good question. So, I was pleased to see that Ms. Smith made the announcement to restore the funding to police officers that the UCP cut at the beginning of their term by hiring the extra 150 officers. We matched that, and then we also went further and said we would also hire 150 more social workers, mental health therapists,
Defund the police candidates?
We would to help
That's on my head, right?
with
like
social
she's
disorder
not
on
running
the streets,
defund the police.
we know that's worrisome to people, very worrisome. We also, however, have committed to restoring funding for affordable housing. Under the UCP, we've lost 8,000 affordable housing units, and a further 4,000 people were cut off of shelter allowances. And that level of homelessness has created a real crisis, contributing to the concerns around community safety.
All right, Ms. Smith, your time.
Well, first off, we wouldn't defund the police. Again, Ms. Notley has so many defund the police candidates on her platform, on her candidate roster. I've lost count of them as well. The frontline services are demoralized, and we are giving courage and confidence back to our frontline officers. We've embedded sheriffs in both Calgary and Edmonton. We're adding 100 police officers in both Calgary and Edmonton because we believe that people have a right to take public transit and feel safe. They have a right to go downtown and be able to have a nice dinner or see a game and not worry that they're going to be randomly attacked. And they certainly have a right to walk past an open doorway without having to inhale secondhand crystal meth smoke. We have an approach that is going to make sure that we crack down on public safety and crime and make sure that people feel safe again.
All right, thank you, Ms. Smith. We've got about 90 seconds for this free debate. Ms. Notley.
Well, I need to start by saying when it comes to defunding the police, the UCP actually defunded the police. The money that they used to hire the 150 is a restoration of the money they cut in 2019. And that's on top of additional police grants that they cut from municipal governments right when they first got elected. So actual defunding of the police is something that I think they should take a responsibility for.
You know, one thing I'm so proud about with our UCP record is it's what's being known as the Alberta model for a recovery-oriented system of care. Because we know policing is only one side of the story. The other is getting people the help that they need. And my chief of staff is one of the foremost experts on the recovery-oriented system of care. We got rid of the $40 per day user fee that Ms. Notley charged. We've added 10,000 treatment beds. We're building recovery communities, some in conjunction with First Nations partners. And we are going to make sure that every single person who wants addiction treatment has access to a treatment bed. Those two things have to go together.
Quickly, Ms. Notley, you've got 20 seconds to rebut.
Well, listen, I think more recovery beds is a great thing, absolutely. And I actually agree with the fact that the accommodation charge associated with those beds that's been in place for 2 decades is now gone. That's great news. But there's more to it. There's more about wraparound services, transitional housing, those kinds of supports, and those remain unfunded right now.
Okay, thank you. Some spirited debate.
Absolutely.
Love it. I love it. Okay. We are now going to head to our closing remarks. Each leader will have 90 seconds.
And this is one final chance for those leaders to make their pitch to Albertans. We start with Danielle Smith.
I first want to say how much of an honor it's been to be your premier for these last 7 months. I've been overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness of Albertans that I meet every single day. These last 3 years have been difficult for all of us. And now the wildfires are testing our resolve as a people once more. But I know that together we will overcome every challenge we face, whether it's a pandemic, a flood, a fire, or economic headwinds. We will take care of one another, and we will move our province forward to a better future. My commitment to each of you, if re-elected, is to serve you with everything I have and to the best of my ability, however imperfect that may be at times. I will continue to focus on growing and diversifying our amazing economy, making life more affordable and our communities safer, and improving healthcare for all Albertans. And I will carefully listen to you and my UCP caucus, because whatever I may have said or thought in the past while I was on talk radio, Albertans are my bosses now, and my oath is to serve you and no one else. I love this province and everything it stands for. We are a land of entrepreneurs and innovators, of pioneers and farmers, of families and communities, a place where the best and brightest come from every corner of the world to join us in building one of the greatest places on earth to live and work and raise a family. From the bottom of my heart, thank you and good night.
Okay, 90 seconds over to you, Ms. Notley.
Well, thank you so much. Tonight, ask yourself, who do you trust to build a better future? Who will focus on the things that actually matter to you? Now, Ms. Smith has spent her entire career campaigning for Albertans to pay out of pocket for basic health care. She's also campaigned to pull Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan, something that would create huge instability in your retirement. Today, she was found to have broken the law by interfering with our justice system. This is just not how our province should be run. Every day is a new drama. You just don't need to put up with this. Enough is enough. So my offer to you is stable, predictable, thoughtful leadership that you can count on. It's time to get back to the things that matter to people. I will make life more affordable, capping car insurance and lowering your utilities. I will support our entrepreneurial spirit by cutting to zero small business taxes and creating more jobs. And because I'm passionate about making sure your family has health care that you always need without paying for it, I have a balanced, costed plan to make sure you get a family doctor. So that is a better future for Alberta. Now, you may not always agree with me, and I may not have always gotten it right, but I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. If I am Premier again, I will work daily to earn your trust and to focus on your priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Notley. Unfortunately, we are out of time. That does wrap up the 2023 Alberta Provincial Leaders Debate. Our thanks once again to NDP Leader Rachel Notley and UCP Leader Danielle Smith for taking part tonight.
Also a big thank you to our panelists for participating. And here's this, a reminder, Election Day is just 11 days away, May 29th. It is your chance to exercise your democratic right to vote.
Thank you for watching, and good night from Edmonton.
I've heard Rachel Notley say she says what she means and she means what she says. I don't know if she's dealing with an identity crisis or what, because she clearly does not mean what she says and says what she means. She contradicts herself all the time. She accuses others, Danielle Smith, of doing precisely the things that she's actually doing on a regular basis. She denies positions that her sort of top candidates hold on a regular basis, saying, well, we've never espoused those values. I don't think, when she says that, it's almost like the literal opposite. She's the opposite of I am what I am. The juxtaposition there of those two closing remarks, Danielle Smith very authentically, I think anyways, saying, listen, like, I'm not perfect, but I'm going to serve you. I'm going to stand up for these industries. I'm just talking about what she's doing. I understand she's in power, so Rachel Notley's going to get her shots in. But it seems very, one, disingenuous, and two, just attacky. And it's so funny for a party, the NDP, that so hates anything American style healthcare, American style this, American style that. Well, their campaign has been entirely American style. They vilify even media that wants to ask questions. They've tried to take a powerful woman in politics, these people who profess to be feminists, and make everyone think she's a hysterical woman. That's been so much of their campaign, is these personal attacks, and I hope it doesn't resonate with Albertans. The polling, it's hard to tell if it does, but the language there, though, she's broken the law. She was found slightly in violation of an ethics thing, but most of the thing was pretty absolving. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, and it was, Smith was right to point out, like, you had an MLA have a massive health privacy breach, was criminally charged. You didn't, and the NDP, from what I understand, knew, because I think he told them that he did it, and they didn't say anything, and they're accusing Smith of unlawfully seeking illegal advice from the government's lawyer. Give me a break. It's funny when when Notley talks about she's going to make life more affordable. She's going to hike the corporate tax 38%, not up to 38%, but by 38%. Who the heck does she think own the corporations in this province? Like, it's, when you talk about corporate businesses, it's not all, Walmart, Amazon, the John Deere dealership. Yeah. Sometimes it's contractors. Actually, the entire oil patch is private contractors. So their corporation owns their pickup truck. They run their phone bills through their corporation, their fuel bills through the corporation, their equipment through the corporation. They pay themselves through the corporation because it is a lot easier for the oil companies to not have to carry the insurance on these guys. So when they hike the corporate tax, that's who it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the little guys, not the big guys. But it's this profound misunderstanding of who and what business owners are in this province between the UCP and the NDP. The NDP just see big, scary corporations. If you don't work for the government, you must be a bad guy. And to hear Notley talk about, like Smith says she's going to charge you for health care. Although
Has Notley said that? I haven't heard that.
Yeah, constantly. And it's like, then it comes out that she was charging drug addicts $40 a day for treatment. Literally the most vulnerable, desperate people amongst us, homeless, drug addicts. She was charging them $40 a day for treatment. She can talk all she wants about, it was in place for 20 years. Yeah, but you were in charge for 4 years and you didn't do anything about it. She can talk about fixing the healthcare system, but she was in charge for 4 years. And wait times got worse and we spent more on it than ever. One thing people don't know about Alberta is we spend way more per capita than BC, socialist BC, and Saskatchewan for healthcare. And we see worse outcomes and longer wait times. But Notley wants to do more of the same. Instead of innovating, like Saskatchewan and like BC.
Well, it's because it's like exciting, and there's the pop music playing, and there's the big signs, we've seen it, and they're making these grandiose claims. They and we've talked about this a little bit, but they sort of care in concept and make grand pitches that sound good. Listen, Danielle Smith coming up and saying, "Oh, you're going to save up to $700 on your taxes," or seniors are going to get 25% off the registry. Listen, none of those things are as exciting as we're going to hire thousands of teachers and we're going to build 40 schools and we're going to do all these things. But they're actual, tangible, practical metrics that are being enacted. And we're seeing things, at least to some observable measure, improve. I said before this started what I thought this debate was going to look like, and I think it came to fruition. You have one candidate who was the premier and another candidate who is the premier. The premier is saying, look, Danielle Smith, look at what we've been doing. I've made mistakes. It's imperfect, but we're heading in the right direction. We're going to continue doing that. Rachel Notley is saying, please, for the love of God, don't look at what I did. Things are going to be entirely different this time, but we don't really have any tangible plans to that effect. On that note, unless you have anything to add, I think we're going to have a special guest joining us after an ad break here momentarily,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah. Let's hit an ad break and then bring in our very, very special, excellent guest.
Extremely special.
The best.
Tamara Leach has been released from jail.
Western separatist Tamara Leach.
Leach will remain in custody.
We have breaking news out of Ottawa to tell you about. A judge has made a decision on whether to grant bail for Tamara Leach, one of the leaders of that recent demonstration in Ottawa.
You may have seen me on the news, but there's more to my story. In my new book, Hold the Line, I share the story of the Freedom Convoy from the heart of the Freedom Convoy. It's a story of hope, courage, and coming together as a community in the Canadian way. You can buy my new book at theconvoybook.com, and in that book, you're going to hear stories from the heart of the convoy, as well as my arrest and my time in jail, like you've never heard them before. Until very recently, I've been quite silent because of my bail conditions, but now I'm ready to tell my story, my side of the story. I know the mainstream media isn't going to be fair to me, as they've already called me and my friends from the convoy terrorists.
There is increasing concern about violent online rhetoric supporting the convoy, and that those with extreme views are planning on attending.
The mayor, who made, in my estimation, just a horrendous decision to negotiate with terrorists.
So I'm launching a book tour across Canada. We'll be doing interviews, signing books, and saying thank you to all Canadians for your support. I've partnered with Rebel News to crowdfund for the cost of my book, as well as our advertising campaign. With your help, we'll be purchasing ads and billboards to spread the word about my book. We'll also be upgrading my home studio, which will enable me to do interviews all around the world. If you're a shop owner or a business owner and you'd like to have a book signing, please fill out the form on our website, which you can find here. And if you'd like to make a donation for the tour, we'll greatly appreciate it. The first 500 people to send in a donation of $200 or more will receive a free signed copy of my book, Hold the Line, My Story from the Heart of the Freedom Convoy. The last time I drove across Canada, something very special happened. Let's make that happen again. Go to theconvoybook.com. Thank you.
Look at him.
Look at that beauty.
The Dubai kid. I was going to say in the flesh, but I guess digitally.
How's it going, friends?
So I should welcome formally to the show our friend Tarek El-Naga. He's a former Maverick Party candidate. And a very careful election watcher, someone who has been digging very deeply into some of the more extremist rhetoric and candidates of the NDP while they seek to normalize themselves and just seem like soft, friendly. Rachel Notley, she's sort of matronly, despite her overdone hair today, her Dolly Parton hair today. She tries to come across as just this friendly face, but they have some very extreme people running for them. Tarek, what did you think about the debate before we get into some of those more extreme candidates that you've been sort of poking around at? What did you think of the debate tonight? Winners, losers, who did what better than the other?
So generally, I definitely do think that Danielle Smith did win it. She did show She came across the way I would describe it, with her foot always forward, and then Rachel Notley with her foot always backwards. There was a cool and calm and collected confidence to Smith, whereas Notley was just nervous and anxious and very attacky. And Sheila, you said this very well, and at the very beginning is you said Rachel Notley's kind of talking at Smith, whereas Danielle Smith is talking to Albertans and talking to the general public. I don't think she ever once turned. The other thing is, even though Rachel Notley was attacking her, she never stopped. Like, she never talked over her, whereas Rachel Notley did twice, from what I remember. So yeah, I think there's just a confidence to Smith that you didn't see with Rachel Notley. So that's where I stand, kind of in the general picture of where this goes.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noticed, is even in the closing statements, Notley focused on Smith. Smith, again, focused on Albertans and why she wants to lead us, and why she's so proud of us. And Notley's closing remarks were, that's a horrible woman over there. We don't like her, basically, is what it came down to. Exactly. Adam, what do you got for Tarek?
Sorry, Adam, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to ask you, you're somebody who, for folks who don't know, we've had the opportunity to have a couple of conversations about this election. For those who don't know Tarek's story, most of you probably do by now, but he came to the Stampede, 12 years ago now, something like that?
Correct.
From Dubai, working in Dubai, great, successful life, all that. He saw the rodeo and fell in love with it. Pretty quickly moved here, packed up, got engrossed, became a real cowboy. He's one of the most Albertan guys I know. And you speak to so passionately how Alberta, and it's not just people from Ontario, it's people from all over the world, are drawn here. And as someone who very recently fell in love with this province, do you feel like that identity that you fell in love with and that reason you came here, they're under attack by Rachel Notley and indeed were in 2015?
100%. So an attack of our core industries, attack of our way of life, and attack on our values. So core industries being oil and gas, agriculture, heavy industry, right? Everything that the left hates. And then also an attack on our values, right? The community of grit, of perseverance, of the Western way of life. Now, you're absolutely right. I think what Danielle Smith did during the debate was she sold the Alberta advantage, right? She, not just the advantage, but the Alberta way of life. She exuded that kind of Alberta value of confidence and calm and collected confidence without arrogance. She said, we are an economically strong province. We will be the economic engine. We'll continue to be the economic engine in Canada. And I really appreciated that about her versus Rachel Notley, who just went attack, 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 like you both said. So yes, I think that we're seeing that come back. Again, if there's one person that was very good at this, it was the late, great King Rothkline, right? Like, he sold the Alberta energy. I'm not going to even call it the Alberta advantage, the Alberta energy, every single day for him in office. And I think we're seeing a return to that.
Great to hear your impassioned sort of insight on this election. For folks out there who haven't checked it out yet, at albertadecides.com, Tarek and I have had two sort of in-depth analysis. The first one, we took a look at which areas of the province would determine the election, largely deciding that Calgary was going to be the battleground. In our second conversation, we talked about the key issues. And in a conversation that we just filmed that'll be out early next week, we're talking about the what if the UCP wins, the what if the NDP wins. So I'm encouraging all of you to go to albertadecides.com, check out those conversations, make sure you're as informed as possible as we approach this election. Sheila, anything else for Tarek here?
Yeah, Tarek, you and I both know that the NDP are running some wildly extreme candidates, anti-police, pro-communist revolution types, and I'm not even remotely exaggerating. I might be downplaying it a little bit. Why are they getting such an easy ride from the media? The media just are not doing their job vetting these NDP candidates. It's citizenry that are vetting them.
Right. Well, it's that, and also the mainstream media. There's a big difference. The independent media, like you, both of you, I consider, close friends. You've been doing an incredible job showing a very balanced picture at some very activist NDP candidates and other independent news outlets as well. So it is the mainstream media, but we know, you and I know, that the mainstream media is always going to be in pockets of the left, or vice versa, depending on the day. But you're absolutely right. Like, I mean, you talk about some of those activist candidates. Two of them come from a very vehemently anti-oil and gas, and not just anti-oil and gas, but a very vehemently anti-Canadian and Albertan oil and gas institution. And they're running in Calgary, the corporate headquarters of oil and gas in the country. That blows my mind. It blows my mind that Rachel Notley is running these candidates, and the fact that they're out there campaigning in Calgary. So I think, going back to Adam's question of where this election is going to be decided, I mean, and again, I always look at Calgary, that's where it's going to be decided. I really think that Danielle Smith did a good job of selling why Alberta is great. And the sway voters, so you have a block that's hardcore UCP voters, you have a block that's hardcore NDP voters, but I think the sway voters in Calgary, and that's new Albertans, either new to country or new to Alberta from within the country, they moved here for a reason, right? They moved here for a more affordable cost of living, for a safer lifestyle, better taxes. I mean, it blew my mind that Rachel Notley used an Ontario statistic to say Ontario is doing this better than Alberta. I'm like,
yeah,
do you really want to lose? Like, as soon as I actually made a note, because I was like, oh, this is unbelievable. Like, I can't believe that she said that. So sorry, like, I answered your question and rambled on for a bit, but hopefully kind of answer your question is I can't believe that they're getting a pass. But again, they're getting a pass from the mainstream media, but they always will. And kind of, I've lost interest, right? And that's why, to me, independent media is going to be the best balanced, most form of finding out election coverage, especially on Rebel.
Thank you. I want to ask you, what do you think the impact of the scandal today was? That the premier got legal advice from her justice minister, and then, found out that, she couldn't help and then just dropped it. Do you think that's going to impact the sway voters? Because this is all going to be decided in Calgary, right? Like, rural Alberta is just going to go UCP.
Right.
Edmonton is, as Ralph Klein described it, a nice city with too many socialists and mosquitoes. So that all is lost in Edmonton. Let's just push that into the North Saskatchewan River. Do you think sway voters in Calgary are actually going to care about this?
I think voters who are nonpartisan are going to care about, can I pay my rent or mortgage? Am I safe going down the street? Do I have good employment opportunities? And do I have options now that are not doubling down on what was a crappy AHS system that Rachel Notley used to, right? Where she's looking at alternative healthcare options. I think, to me, in terms of day-to-day living, that's what matters. And I'd like to have trust and faith in the sway voters that that's what they're going to vote on, and not vote on platitudes or empty words, or now the NDP blowing up the ethics commissioner report, which again, all the things that they blew up, Danielle Smith said over and over again in the debate. There was zero evidence of emails after 1 million emails that were reviewed. There was no contact with persecutors, and then they're still going to play that, because they don't have anything else to play. They really don't. They can't play the economy. They can't play options around healthcare, around education, around the performance of just really is what I think the best lifestyle and the best opportunities in the entire country. They can't do that. And they also know that they lost people in their 4 years, whereas Danielle Smith has gained tens of thousands of people. Alberta has set a record in net interprovincial migration in the country. I remember the energy minister of the NDP saying, well, if energy workers want to move to BC, they can. And I think, no, you know what, Rachel Notley's kind of got that whole thing where she's going to just run on platitudes, whereas Danielle Smith actually is running on real life action.
This is something we've talked about. Now, the fact is, as Justin Trudeau, depending on where people stand on elections, but Justin Trudeau did not appoint himself. There was enough people in this country, constitutional fairness aside, that actually believed and agreed with Justin Trudeau to vote for him. Similarly, despite the fact that Justin Trudeau is wildly unpopular in Calgary and in much of Alberta, we do have a progressive mayor, Jyoti Gondek, who is very much a doppelganger ideologically of Justin Trudeau. And now you have the NDP starting to gain ground, theoretically, at least according to some of the polls, within Calgary. Why do you think it's possible? Do you think that it isn't like these politicians are doing this to people? People are, through the democratic process, not all people, but some people, asking for this. Do you think the culture is shifting that much in Calgary, or does the fact that they're still critical of Trudeau indicate that something else is going on?
I don't think it's the culture shifting that drastically, but there definitely is a shift. So I do think that there is a group of people that have moved from outside the province because it's cheaper, but will vote for exactly the same things that they left. I mean, you see that in the U.S. between, let's say, Californians moving to Texas. I think that there's people that are going to move to Alberta and don't know why Alberta is cheaper and don't know why Alberta is better. And to me, I think we as Albertans, as a bigger community, and I generally use my position as Adam, you correctly pointed, I still consider myself a new Albertan, using that position to tell people why Alberta is great and what makes her great. And it isn't just the economy and the money and the cost of living, but it's also the values of our community. Now, in terms of the second part of this, and I would say this is systemic, not dissimilar to the mainstream media, we've seen an education system over probably 2 decades, 3 decades, that is starting to output into our communities and within voting age now, a lot of people that are socialist leaning. They can vote, right? So we're seeing the output of that in our communities. I think what we need to do is now educate young voters, and for the first time, there'll be new voters, on what are the dangers of socialism, why it doesn't work in society, and why a balanced economy is the right way to go.
I thought it was a bit rich for Notley to talk about just how empty Calgary is in the downtown core, when it was her coalition, the NDP coalition with Justin Trudeau, who ultimately chased off all the big oil and gas majors out of the downtown core. I think at one point in Calgary, they had 30% corporate vacancy, like in the commercial spaces in the downtown core. And I think only now it's starting to recover. And it's my fear that if Notley's elected, that recovery is over. And we're going to wake up every day like we did back in 2015, 2016, 2017 to hear 800 layoffs here, another 500 layoffs there, another 300 layoffs there, ConocoPhillips leaving, Acana leaving, TC Energy leaving. It was just every day. It was another oil field major that was leaving, and the small service side companies, they were just closing up shop. They're just saying we can't do it anymore. I guess, why does Notley think we're hard of remembering? Like, it wasn't all that long ago. It was literally 5 years ago. Like, what? It's just the audacity of it all, that she can just get away with, rewriting her own history like that.
Absolutely. I think, we've talked about this, and Premier Smith said it in the debate. She can't run on her record. So that's why she's on the attack, and on the attack of personality. Because again, in terms of numbers, you said it really well. As a matter of fact, Sheila, I was working in downtown with clients in the oil and gas sector during those years. And I remember literally lines of cabs out in the street with people walking out with their boxes during kind of the mass layoff during the NDP years. And it was a really bad combination, because it was a Justin Trudeau government and a Rachel Notley government in Alberta. So I think she's trying to make us forget, or she's trying to, again, go after that middle voter that perhaps at the time did not live in Alberta. Again, she knows that rural Alberta is lost. If you notice, she said absolutely nothing in terms of rural issues. She said absolutely nothing. And that speaks volumes to what the NDP care about, which is, again, their union voter base rather than, the rural voter base. And also trying to go after that downtown swayable voter base that elected Joe Ceci and elected Jyoti Gondek and so on. So they're trying to go after that. I don't think it's going to work. In my heart of hearts, I do think that the UCP are going to win this election, and that would be my prediction. But I think that Rachel Notley is just going to try everything now and see what sticks, because she knows she's on the tail end of this election.
So that is your prediction. You do think the UCP is going to grab this?
I do. I do think that the UCP is going to win this election. By what seat number, I couldn't tell you, but I do think that they will.
Majority, minority?
Definitely a majority. Well, I mean, in this case, because there is only really two parties in the House, whoever wins gets a majority in this case. We don't have a third party here. I can't see, let's say, the Alberta Party winning a seat or any other. This is strictly a two-party race. So whoever gets 44 seats gets it, and gets it by a majority government. What will be interesting to see, rather than who gets 44 seats, because in my heart I think it's the UCP, is what cabinets will look like, because I think the seats are going to shuffle a little bit in terms of cabinets, rather than who's sitting at the leadership table either end. So it'll be pretty interesting to see, but that's something to worry about on May 30th. Right now, and that'll be fun too, because that in its own will be a whole set of moves. I do think that we're going to see a pretty different cabinet on May 30th than we have on May 29th. But in terms of who's going to win this, I do think Premier Smith is running on a very, very strong platform. She's covered and balanced well between rural issues and between urban issues. She is going after, and positively going after, the vote in the middle, whereas the NDP continue to fearmonger, continue to attack. Adam, you said it really well. They're the ones using American-style politics. That's all they've got. That's all they can do is just attack, attack, attack.
Well, Tarek, thanks so much for your time and your insight. If you want to catch more of these conversations, as I mentioned, there's these like 15, 20-minute breakdowns of key election issues. Two there already at albertadecides.com. Another one coming soon. Be sure to check those out. Right now, we're just going to throw to one last ad break, and then Sheila and I are going to give our sort of final thoughts and do a quick little chat there. So thanks again so much for joining us. And
Bye,
we'll be back. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, buddy. Bye.
I am doing something today that I have never tried before. Listen up. I'm looking for collaborators in a new and exciting initiative. As you most likely know, YouTube a long time ago demonetized Rebel News, and we are 100% viewer funded. Now, while our supporters are fantastic at helping us cover legal campaigns and special reporting missions, unfortunately, the reality is our day-to-day operational expenses often exceed our income stream. Which is crazy if you think about it, because my videos across all platforms attract hundreds of thousands of views and sometimes even millions. So I want to share that reach with the right partners. If you have a product or business and want to enter a win-win relationship with me, please go to rebelnews.com/ads and fill in the form to let me know. I won't be accepting anyone. I need to believe in your business or product so I can sell it proudly for you. And for successful applicants, I will guarantee a minimum view count, meaning even if your ad is published on the less popular reports, we'll keep promoting your business or product until it gets the agreed minimum eyeballs. So again, if you have a cool company or product that either wants to take advantage of my reach or want to support my work through advertising in a way that you can write it off as a tax deduction, or both, head over to rebelnews.com/ads and hopefully we can join forces soon.
Well, it sounds like we have just two chats. I think they came in on Rumble, so those are Rumble rants. We have about 3 minutes left in the show, so if anybody wants to throw a paid chat, we'll read it on air. Maybe you have a prediction, maybe you have a comment about what you saw tonight, either from Adam and I, or from Smith and Notley, or maybe all four of us. Maybe you have a question about how the debate went. Actually, I didn't think it was specifically terrible. Though it was put together by the mainstream media consortium. I mean, there was that dumb question about like, what's the one thing you like about each other? I don't care. I want to know how they're different, not how much they like each other. This isn't a therapy session anyway. So I'll get to a couple of these chats. We've got one from regular Rebel News live stream watcher, Adam Ottawa. gives us $5, says, just tuning in for a bit to see what's happening with my possible future province. Why can't we have more normal adult politicians like Smith? Well, that's because the media eviscerates them, because the media is funded by Justin Trudeau. And the biggest adversary, I think, to Justin Trudeau in this country, frankly, two Alberta women, one Tamara Lich, one Danielle Smith. And so they are incentivized, the mainstream media, to attack Smith and whip up things she said or done into controversies they definitely are not. I'll leave it to Adam. Maybe you have something to add.
No, I think you hit the nail right on the head there. The other thing too is, I mean, there is sort of, and this is an entire aside, but the involved steps, other than rare circumstances, to get into politics. Very often what ends up happening is people, whether with well-to-do parents or affluent ideologues sponsoring them to engage in politics, normal working class people who are trying to pay their bills, get by, take care of their families, very often they don't have the capacity to get into politics. So I think you have one, it's not necessarily the most accessible field, and then two, a media that's very hostile to what we would consider normal or traditional. I think those two things combine to exclude folks that might otherwise be considered normal from venturing into politics.
That is indeed true. Next question or next comment is, it's a buck, and it says, what would Jack Layton, so that's deceased former federal NDP leader Jack Layton, think of the federal provincial NDP today? What do you think, Adam?
You know, I will just back away from putting words in the mouth of someone who's deceased. What I can tell you is that some of the principles that the left once stood for, pushing back individual freedoms, standing up against big pharma, lots of those big things, like supporting organic farmers, supporting small businesses like that. So many of those types of things that the left used to espouse and perhaps offered some corrections even on to right-wingers, striking something of a balance. Well, those things have evaporated. Jagmeet Singh federally just props up the Trudeau Liberals while pretending to criticize them. Rachel Notley follows suit. They are no longer espousing those things from the left, from progressivism, that could be respected at the very least. I think they've lost that. So I think anyone involved with the foundational elements of new democratic principles, perhaps not the socialism, but those other admirable traits, I think they'd probably be a little bit disappointed with what we're seeing from Jagmeet and Rachel.
Yeah, it's weird, hey? Conservatives used to be like, let's smoke and drink whiskey and buy all of our meat at Walmart. And I don't have anything bad to say about Walmart, frankly. They are an affordable place for people of lower socioeconomic background to shop at. But we used to be those people. And to some extent, I probably still am. Like, don't boss me around. But it's funny because the left was always very skeptical of big business and what they were putting in their bodies. And I think that's where we sort of hold hands with the traditional left these days, conservatives and the traditional left, those people who felt abandoned possibly by their unions during COVID. They were, you know, they sort of found a home with conservatives who are, I don't know, they just don't like being told what to do. I think whether you like or agreed with Jack Layton, and I did neither, at least he held the Liberals to account. He offered something different than the Liberals. But at this point, the NDP, at least federally, and I would say even here provincially as well, I mean, it is all one party, they are just the socialist wing of the Liberal Party of Canada. They don't actually offer anything different whatsoever. And like I said, whether you like Jack Layton or you didn't like Jack Layton, and like I said, I did neither, he at least was different. And Jagmeet Singh is just the same. Yeah, I respected at least the fact that he offered something like a third party. There is no third party NDP anymore. It's the Liberal Party, just the left wing of the Liberal Party.
Roasted them occasionally. Like there's clips of like you'd have conservatives sharing clips of these people criticizing the government. It wasn't these vapid, empty Jagmeet Singh tweets where he's actually propping these things up while criticizing them. There was something to say there. So great thought there, and definitely a topic that perhaps the NDP should be having among their own ranks after they lose this election. I don't know if that's going to happen, but let's say it does. On that note,
We got one more. We've got one more.
Another one.
One more just came in, again from Paul Otto Newman. Paul is also a regular live stream watcher and chatter, so appreciate you, Paul. Gives us $5 and says, I predict that the UCP will win 40 or 41 seats in rural Alberta and 3 to 5 in Calgary. The NDP has to run a marathon to win, while the UCP only needs to sprint. I hope you're right. I don't think people actually care that the premier called the justice minister and asked him a question. And I know for sure the left doesn't care because they keep voting for Justin Trudeau, Mr. Ethics violation, that they like give them Roman numerals now. He's done so many. So I know that any criticism from the left on this sort of thing is completely insincere and opportunistic.
Yeah, it'll be whether the absurd efforts, and I know Ezra today, our boss, was doing an incredible job tweeting out headlines from the CBC, who's basically proven to have lied on this front, as well as the NDP, but the headlines aren't saying like largely exonerated or whatever, which is what this, would be actual reporting, would be transparent and honest reporting. That's not what we're seeing. I think this is very much a test for us as Albertans, whether we're gullible, whether we believe broadly the narrative that's being pushed and these manufactured scandals every few weeks. Next week will be interesting because that's likely, if they have any further clips from radio shows that are supposed to be bombshells, we're going to see them dropped. And it's going to be whether Albertans buy that or whether they say enough is enough, we don't care, we just want to be able to pay our bills, as Tarek said. I think that will be the crux of this election. It won't necessarily be Smith. It won't necessarily be Notley. It'll be Albertans looking at themselves saying, listen, what do we want? Do we want to move forward? Do we want jobs? Do we want opportunities? Or are we going to vote for empty promises and big headlines that we've seen back in 2015 will not come to fruition?
From your lips to God's ears, Adam. Although I feel hopeful. I feel like we are not going to fall into that collective madness. By we, I mean Albertans and not me specifically. But I feel like there are enough Albertans who remember the dark days of 2015, I guess through to 2017, when it was real bad. I think there are enough Albertans still around who remember that. And I am hopeful that my fellow Canadians who have moved to our province are not going to Ottawa or Calgary. They're going to realize why they came here, because it is free, it's booming, it's an affordable place to live, and the people here are great. And we are, as Kian Simone says, ungovernable, which is what I love about us most. So, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful the UCP are going to win. I don't have the impending sense of doom that I generally have during election time. So we'll see. Maybe I'm just reading the room wrong.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping you're right. As someone that there is that slight sense of dread, that slight sense of fear. I mean, I've got kids and I know what a second round of NDP, you do too, what a second round of NDP government would do to this province moving forward. It'd be a legacy, another round. We're still just barely starting to bounce back from the first round. This time they'll feel, if they win, they'll feel emboldened. They'll have this mandate. But like you said, I think Albertans, and I think people seeking, even if they don't know it, even if they don't fully understand, people who seek out Alberta, they have something within them inherently Albertan. And I hope that speaks to them when it comes time to cast their ballots.
Well, Adam, we should wrap up the show. Thanks to everybody who tuned in, who watched our reactions live. Thanks to our friend Tarek El Naga. He always has some great insights. Thanks to everybody who chipped in a little bit to keep the lights on through a paid chat. Thanks to everybody working late in the studio in Toronto, by the way. It is 9:37 in Toronto. It's only 7:37 here in Alberta. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you. And everybody who works behind the scenes to cut clips and post on social media. It's not just our producers and it's not just your